Hey everyone, Jason Fung here, architect working in Toronto. This is a 4-part series to talk about how to become an architect. We covered education, experience. This video is about examination, and the 4th part is about starting your own firm, the trials and tribulations on that. Largely to become a licensed architect, the final step is your examinations. That, of course, is discrete from starting a firm. You can be a licensed architect and work in a firm, and that's totally fine. A lot of people are totally fine doing that. Myself, I wanted to be an entrepreneur, or I've always saw myself as an entrepreneur, so that's a separate thing, and that's why it's a 4th part. At this point, you've been working maybe a few firms, you have your master's, you've ticked off these boxes, and you've been tracking your hours as an intern architect. That's what it's called. That's what it's called here in Ontario. There's different names for it: graduate architect, intern architect, aspiring architect, whatever. Here in Ontario, you're tracking your hours, and I think it's about 2,500 hours, so 2,500 hours. That's when you qualify to write your exams. Of course, I wrote my exams 10 years ago, whatever it is. It was years ago, and it was a little bit different back then. The amount of hours were different, and the actual headings. There's different. It's not just like you work this many hours, you'll be good at it. The province wants you to know, the OAA, Ontario Association of Architects, wants to make sure that you're getting the necessary pots of experience. Site planning, schematic design, design development, construction, contract administration, going to site to see the site functions, the construction, talking to contractors, error checking, coordination of drawings, building code. There's all these facets to the profession that to become a licensed architect you should have experience in. Some firms, typically a larger firm, due to efficiency, you might be pigeonholed a little bit. So you might be working on escalators for a year, or you might be working on stairs for a year, or steel for a year, like very specific things. Because if you get good at something, a good business will be like, okay, well, you're going to get specialized in this, because then we could just go to that person, bing, bang, boom, it's done. It's like all this time and effort into that person will yield a profit because we're not reinventing the wheel with someone else every time. There's an efficiency to that. On the flip side, though, as a person, you're not growing that much, and you're not being exposed to that much. So unfortunately, in this profession, to get the necessary experience, sometimes you have to leave a great firm to go somewhere else to get the experience that you need. Unfortunately, it's really unfortunate. Some firms, though, have a diversity of work and have an openness to try different things with the same staff member, so they get a nice broad range of experience. And if you happen to be in a firm like that, that's great. So you might be able to get all your experience in one practice to qualify to write your exams. The OAA specifically, they'll send you a letter and say, you're getting too much experience in just single family dwellings, residential, homes. You need to get some commercial experience. You need to get some other experience, because if you're not diverse, how can we give you a license to potentially design airports if you've never done anything besides a house? So I mean, they do call you out on that. I got a letter that was like, you're doing too much of this particular thing, and so I actually had to leave. I had to go to a different firm to get that other side of experience. On the flip side, I mean, the benefit of that is I got to see how a different firm, every time I had to basically jump to a different firm, I got experience of like, how do they manage time, or how do they track through this project, or how do they, and each firm will do it slightly differently. And so if you get to go to different firms, you get a sense of, oh, who does something really well, like how do they do it really well versus a different firm. you get to pick and choose for eventually that fourth part of starting your own practice. You get to pick and choose. It's like, I want to do things this way because I've seen it done this way, or I want to do it this way because they did it this way and it's great, kind of thing. The exams. So in Canada, there's 4 exams, and it's the ExAC, ExAC. And these architecture exams, there's 4 of them, and they're usually across 2 days. During the pandemic, in 2020, 2021, in that zone, they had them in February, oddly enough, and they were partially virtual or something like that. I didn't write them at that time, of course, so I only heard through the grapevine of how they were doing it. The 2 architects at my firm, they wrote it in person, and it was also in February. When I was writing the exams, they were in November. Historically, they're always in November. Like, I think it's like the first or second Monday and Tuesday, maybe the second Monday and Tuesday of November is dedicated to these exams, and it's every year. It's different. The American system, the NCARBS, I think it's 9 exams, and it's rolling. So throughout the year, you can write them, and you can write them basically immediately out of your master's program. So you graduate and you can start writing them, even though you might not have obtained the experience to be able to write them. So you have to get some experience to get through all these exams. Versus in Canada, you need at least a base set of hours, 2,500, something like that. And then you qualify, but you still need the 4,000 hours total eventually. Canada, our population is a lot lower. So the number of architects writing these exams, I imagine it's in the maybe 400 people every year in that zone. I imagine about 300 of them are in Ontario. It's just a big mass of the population is here. That's my guess. I don't know 100%. You can always check that online. And you're writing. I mean, it's the point of the exam at this point is standardization. It was told to me by an architect I used to work for, and she was like, in a way, it's what's the lowest bar to be an architect? What's the lowest bar, and you have to just be above that. And so if you think of it that way, the pressure is a little bit off. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, I just need to be just good enough to meet this standard to pass the exams. But on the flip side is it's kind of nice that there's a standard system. It's like everyone writes these tests and a certain percentage pass them, and that way any architect you meet in Canada at least has the same bar passing this level. They're not particularly grueling in the sense, like, if you've got enough experience writing the exams, they are tough, but it's more difficult in the sense that you haven't written an exam in like 5-6 years. You've been working in a firm, but then doing the Scantron or whatever it is, like with the little bubbles, you're rusty. And I remember sitting down on the first exam being like, oh, I remember this. And it's like, oh, what did I used to do in high school and in undergrad and in masters to write exams? Oh, right, okay, I should go through, and like all of a sudden you have to shake off the rust in that first exam. And then you get back into it. It's like, right, you go through the questions you know, don't dwell too much on a question you don't know, you go back to it, kind of thing. And sometimes other questions answer earlier questions, oddly enough. It's like, it gives you the answer later on in the booklets. The 4 parts. So there's different themes for each exam. The first one is like pre-design, schematic design, that kind of early stuff. The second one, I remember, it was about building code. The exam so the exam is actually nationwide. It's across Canada, so they use the National Building Code. Some provinces adopt the National Building Code because they don't have the resources to have their own provincial building code. Here in Ontario, because there's enough population, there's enough people, there's enough kind of things to govern it, we have the Ontario Building Code, which is actually expanded further than the National Building Code. It's much larger than the National Building Code, simply because they can go into the nuts and bolts of things. There's the resources to get very specific about certain things, but largely they're very similar too. So the second exam is the National Building Code. The third exam was more about design development, things with engineers, like coordinating drawings with engineers, and questions about contract administration. Some contract administration, some things into the later part of a project. And the fourth exam was contracts. So like CCDC 2, CCDC 5B, like all those things of more of the legalese side of things, and contractor to client relationships kind of stuff, our role during that time. So I mean, that's a bit about the exam. Here in Ontario, it's written typically at the CNE, and it was mainly shaking off the rust. Pro tip: there's not much to eat at the CNE. When you get there, I highly recommend, if you have a car or you rent a car, you park it there so you have a home base. Because you come out of the exam, there's nothing. There might be a Starbucks like 20 minutes away, but everyone's going there. So I would say pack a lunch, bring a banana, keep it in the car, park nearby, spend the money to park nearby so you have a home base to even take a nap. That's what I did. I took my car, parked it there, and then I came out of the first exam, the first 3 hours, I guess 9 to noon or 8 to 11, whatever it was, came out, I was like, oh, I'm exhausted, but I have another exam in like an hour, or 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, whatever it was, for the next 3 hours. So it's like, I need to reset my mind. I need to relax a little bit. And having a car, having that ability to just recline the seat back, eat something, some brain food, take it easy kind of thing, that will do you really well. It'll be very good for you. That's the first pro tip. Second one is I took vacation. So I took, I think, a week off before the exams, just so that I took a break from work. I could reset my mind, and I could spend the time to basically read the National Building Code cover to cover slowly. You spend an hour in the morning, and you can get through, in a week, you can get through the whole building code. And then you learn that it's like, the first parts of each chapter of a building code teach you show you how to read the building code. It's like, this is part one. This is how you read the building code. And then part one of part 3, it's like, this is how you read part 3. This is how it should go. I didn't know that. Working in the working world, you just jump straight to part 3, straight to part 9. So part 9 is small buildings, part 3 is large buildings. You just go straight to those parts. You find the code reference you need, and that's it. But reading it cover to cover at least once in your profession is a very valuable thing. I recommend having the Canadian Handbook of Practice that's released by the RAIC. They have some really great study topic. It goes through basically the profession, and it is being updated every so often. So it does tackle things like, at one point, texting became a thing. Not texting wasn't always a thing. And it's like, how do we address this in architecture? Is this documented communications that need to be on record for 7 years, kind of thing? Site visits, how do you do that? Like, these are all kind of addressed in the Handbook of Practice, running a practice, things like that. That's really good study material. And then there's other study material that I recommend you try to find a group of friends. Typically, you guys are your class that you graduated from, some of them might be in the same, within throwing distance of writing the exams as you. I highly recommend you get into a study group. You talk about things, once a week leading up to the exam, or once a month, whatever it is. Share notes. It will help, and all of a sudden you're diversifying your understanding of the profession as well as a person. So I found that was one of the biggest benefits of writing the exams. There was the difficulty of writing the exams, but then there's also this second level of growth. When you write them, all of a sudden you studied. Like, I hadn't studied for something since the master's program or since undergrad. You're studying for this thing, and it's like a great refresher. Or I remember I was reading through coordination of drawings with engineers, and I'd been doing it in a firm. I've been looking across structural, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, all those things, and coordinating. And then I read about it and be like, oh, this makes so much sense. Like why you do certain things. It's like, oh, of course, because there's a reason for why you do certain things when you coordinate. And so it was a great refresher, and if anything, it just makes you a more, it helps formalize the education, and it makes you a better architect by studying for these exams. So as much as it's practical based, our career is very much rooted in practice. There is a theory side of things, and there's a formal kind of training that's really important in what we do to kind of solidify all these things. And yeah, it's a grueling 12 hours, 3 hours, 3 hours, 3 hours, 3 hours. It's tough. I ended up failing one. When I wrote my exams, I did fail the 4th exam because I didn't know that much about contracts. So I had to wait a whole year. And that's fine. That's a humbling experience. If anything, it told me I wasn't ready at the time. I wasn't ready to walk this next chapter because I'm deficient in material. The next year, it was a piece of cake because I knew what I needed to study. I had gained the experience in that year following. But the toughest thing is when you have most of your friends will likely have passed. And so that's the brutal thing is like, hey, how'd you do? And it was like, because everyone's celebrating. Everyone else is celebrating. And you have to eat that humble pie. And if anything, that gave me even more resolve to do better the next time. So, I mean, I'm sad that I had failed one, but, that's life, and failure is a great teacher. So, that's a little story of my experience. I hope you enjoyed this video about examinations. I can't say that much about it because technically the exam is supposed to be a surprise, like the course material. You can read up on other kind of sample exams and things like that, but largely it's experience-based. And so reading the code is one thing, but like a lot of questions are scenario-based, and you can't really prepare for that besides practice. So hopefully you're working somewhere that's great, that's giving you a nice wealth of experience, and good luck on your exams. That's it for this video. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you on the next one. Cheers.